Awesome. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Kettenbill. I'm the Vice Chancellor for External Relations, and it's really great to have you on the fall semester return webinar. It's been a while since we've done a town hall, so we were chatting on the panelists among ourselves that we're a little bit rusty. So we'll hopefully get back in the groove here quickly. It is, like I said, it's great to be with you today. As you're fully aware, there's been a tremendous amount of news, policies, and a lot of communication that's been happening over the last couple of weeks. So the summer certainly is not slow. There's a lot of work that's happening behind the scenes. And really, it's a perfect time to come together, to talk about what these policies mean. There's a lot of questions that have resulted from this news. And hopefully after today, people feel a little bit more informed and comfortable about the direction where we're going for the fall semester. So it is, personally, it's hard to believe 18 months in and we're still doing town halls about COVID and adjusting work schedules and learning schedules. But, we've done a pretty good job so far, and we know that great work is going to continue. So just a few housekeeping issues here. We have plenty of questions that were submitted in advance, so those will be addressed in the presentations, or specifically I will address those questions to our panelists. Speaking of the panelists, we have the Chancellor, Domenico Grasso, with us, Interim Provost Gabriella Scarlata, and we're also very fortunate again to have Dr. Preeti Malani, Chief Health Officer, with us today, which is very timely too, with the variants and a lot of the additional scientific information that's been shared. We're also joined by all the senior leaders, members of our Return to Campus Committee, our Emergency Operations Center, and any questions that we can't answer, we will definitely defer. So you may hear and see them later in the presentation. If you do have questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A tab along the bottom. The chat is active, but that's for you. We're not going to look at that. We want all questions in the Q&A tab. It will help us moderate, and I know some are coming in now. And I think that's it. So that in terms of housekeeping, so I'm going to open. Chancellor Domenico Grasso will open things up, and then we have very short comments, and then we're going to go really into Q&A today. So Chancellor Grasso.
Thanks very much, Ken, and thank you all for taking time out of your summer to join us for this town hall meeting. It's amazing how long it seemed for the summer to arrive, how long it took, and then how quickly the summer is flying by, and we're almost at the beginning of the semester again. And that's always an exciting time to welcome our students back and see the excitement in their eyes. And now we'll be able to see it face to face, albeit masked, very, very soon. So I want to thank everybody who has done so much thinking and work on getting us safely to this point and thinking about how we can safely proceed with the fall semester. We have a lot of people to thank: the Return to Campus Committee that was chaired by Carrie Schumacher, senior leaders, the Emergency Operations Center that's led by Laura Drabchek, and of course, all of you that have provided comments and thoughts and questions that we've considered very carefully as we've developed our plans. We've got a lot to talk about today. We announced, of course, that everyone is expected to be vaccinated for the fall. We are going to try to be as accommodating as possible with regard to medical and health exemptions. And we are also going to try to educate as many people who have concerns as possible in thinking through this vaccination requirement. And we've provided health advisors to offer their assistance in helping you think through that. And this is one of the main reasons we have Dr. Malani, who is an internationally recognized expert on both the vaccine and on COVID. So we can ask her today any of your questions and concerns. And we've also announced, of course, our face covering policy, and we're going to be requiring face masks in all indoor places unless you're in a private office with a closed door. And this is primarily because of the rise in the prevalence of the Delta variant and how quickly this is spreading through the community. And it's in some cases infecting those that have been vaccinated as well, albeit they don't often exhibit symptoms. And Dr. Malani can address that, along with the the Lambda variant, which has developed in South America, primarily in the Peru area, I believe. So with that, I would be more than happy to answer questions later on. And Ken has a list of questions that have been submitted, and he will be proctoring that. But I do want to say that all of our decisions have been made with the health and well-being of our campus community at the forefront, and offering, of course, an outstanding education for our students. But keeping everybody safe is our primary goal, and this is why we've arrived at these very difficult decisions. So Ken, I'll turn it over to you and let you proceed.
Well, thank you, Chancellor. Next, we'll quickly go to Dr. Malani. I think the Chancellor sort of queued up, some of the things that, we're hoping you can address. If you could talk a little bit about the Delta variant. We're starting to hear I know there's multiple variants, but the Lambda variant now has seemed to emerge into conversation. If you can talk about breakthrough cases, I mean, quite a few people are vaccinated, yet still coming down with COVID. And finally, I know you were very much involved with the decision-making on the policies, but, based on where things are this fall, I mean, are you comfortable with the direction for the fall semester, bringing people back face to face? So if you can comment on those three areas there, so.
Great. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Domenico. Thanks to all of you. I just want to add in my personal thanks to everything you've done for the past 18 months and beyond, supporting the academic mission, research, classes, athletics, really libraries, everything in between. And I just especially want to give a shout out to everyone who have been supporting our students. I think it's been an exceptionally busy year and a half, and it hasn't been easy to keep the trains moving, and they've more or less been on time. So that's good. And I think a lot of people may know this from previous town halls is Dearborn is home for me. I grew up in the area. I actually spent, I probably had like my own little section of Mardigan Library. And so it's an important place. I got married across the street. My father worked at Ford for his entire career. So it's a community I know well. It's a community I love. And I will try to answer those questions. And I'm just speaking from the heart here. And I'm also a parent of a student in Ann Arbor and a high school student, both of whom will be back in classes after a long time. And, the pandemic, it's not over, but I remain very optimistic. COVID, unfortunately, is going to remain here with us for the foreseeable future. And as the pandemic changes, our recommendations and approach have to change. So I will say there's a lot of churn right now. And what we're talking about today may be very different in even a couple weeks or a month. And I will say, I think it is getting better. I just want to be that. I want to be optimistic, not naive, but optimistic. And I think Michigan is set up to be better than a lot of places right now. A few months ago, the CDC updated their guidance to say, if you're fully vaccinated, go back to doing everything you want without a mask, without physical distancing. Basically, if you're vaccinated, you're protected. And that was based on data really with earlier versions of the virus. And I'll talk a bit about what a variant is in a moment. But with the Alpha variant, the so-called UK variant, B117, this was really great news for many of us. And I have to say, I personally dropped wearing a mask to the grocery store because I wanted people to feel safe. And then a few weeks ago, things started to really change. And I know it feels like we swung back. The numbers in Michigan, I just checked them a few minutes ago. They are going up, but they're not going up that high. We're not in a danger area yet, but things can change. And we'll talk about breakthrough cases. Michigan, we all know, was hit very hard. In Wayne County, was hit hard very early in March of 2020. And again in the fall and again in the spring. So this is not news to us. Sometimes I think, well, maybe enough people have had COVID that there's some immunity. I mean, it's hard to figure out all these things, but our vaccination rate as a state is okay. We're above the middle, but we have a room to go, and we'll talk about that. As opposed to a year ago, we're not powerless against SARS-CoV-2, and we don't need to just learn to live with it. I will just say this around vaccination. There've now been hundreds of millions of doses given, not just in the United States, but really all over the world, with very small numbers of serious safety concerns, on the order of a few per million. And historically, if side effects to vaccines occur, they occur early. And I recognize it was a very easy decision for myself and for my family. And I have members of my extended family who are still nervous and who haven't been vaccinated. So, you know, I try to come to this with a lot of humility, but I will do everything I can to reassure you about the safety of these vaccines. And even if there's some unknowns about, well, this hasn't been around that long, we know a lot about COVID, and there's just no question in terms of safety. And especially at this moment, you know, I would go so far as to say broad vaccination is our really only way to something that feels like normal. And that's become very clear. And it's not just that, well, I'm vaccinated, so I'm protected. It's really that we're vaccinated and everyone's protected. So it's not just you, it's everyone around you. And for many of our students in Dearborn, their household isn't just them. I mean, some of them do live on their own. I know many live across the street at the Union, but you know, many are also in multi-generational households. And so this is a way to really keep everyone that you love safe. You know, variants are something that people talk a lot about. And you know, as viruses spread, they constantly change their mutations, they change their genetic code. And when a virus develops mutations, it's called a variant of the original. And most of the mutations that occur in SARS-CoV-2, so the virus that causes COVID, they don't really alter the functioning that much. But when mutations occur in that spike protein, we've heard a lot about that S protein, that's how the virus binds to the human nose, to the epithelium. And sometimes these mutations can lead to the virus being easier to transmit. And that's what Delta has done. And it's really an important variant. If we think about the regular sort of wild type virus being a R0, we heard that term a lot, like each person would spread to 2 people. The R0 for Delta is probably 6 to 8. So each person who develops infection, who spreads, they're going to infect 6 or 8 people. So that's where breakthroughs have occurred. I want to talk a little bit about breakthroughs. Breakthroughs are still pretty rare. I want to reassure people it's not that the vaccines are useless and that it's inevitable we're all going to get breakthrough. For one, if you're vaccinated, you're not getting that sick. You're not being hospitalized. You're certainly not dying, thank goodness. The folks we are seeing in the hospital, anecdotally, just at the University of Michigan at St. Joe's, where my brother is an infectious disease physician as well. These are generally individuals who either are older. You know, I saw someone who was 108 the other day, believe it or not, who had breakthrough infection, but actually was sort of doing okay because she was fully vaccinated. That was, I think, an exceptional situation, but we're also seeing people who have organ transplants or hematologic malignancies, people whose immune system is not normal. And we do see some younger people, they tend to all be unvaccinated. So I will say there's kind of 2 options, either get vaccinated or unfortunately, likely get COVID. And, you know, so that's kind of where we're at. A lot of discussion around Lambda also, and we'll, maybe in the chat, we'll share a piece that we were talking about from CNN that actually was interviewed for. At this point, Lambda is pretty rare in the United States. I don't want people to think that, oh, that's the next thing to be worried about, because again, we're not powerless against COVID. Vaccines continue to work. What we worry about is if we have uncontrolled spread is that we will develop a variant that doesn't respond to vaccination and doesn't respond to treatments. So far, even with Delta, that hasn't happened. Although vaccination is maybe less effective, it's not ineffective. And I think that is an important point. I will also just share a couple examples. There was a bike race in Iowa that some of you may be aware of, faster horses, and there were a number of cases, including a couple of my friends who were fully vaccinated, and they were staying 15 to a room in these small towns in Iowa. And you know, they ended up getting infected, but they had very mild symptoms. And fortunately, they didn't spread to anyone. We are at this moment having to pause a bit and reset and get back to wearing masks in indoor public spaces because the risk is unknown to some extent. And there's a perception anyway that there are a lot of people who are unvaccinated in those spaces, including children and including people who may not have responded very well to vaccination. So my hope is in the coming weeks, we're going to learn more. We'll be able to talk thoughtfully about this. Ken, you asked about the fall. You know, I will say I've been working in the healthcare setting since March of 2020. I'm in the ICU seeing patients. I wear a mask. I wear a different kind of mask in the ICU, but I feel very safe. I'm fully vaccinated. I wear a mask. We are not able to socially distance at the health system. Anyone who spent time there, and we don't have that kind of luxury of space. We haven't seen transmissions. When transmissions happen, it's because everyone's eating lunch or everyone went to a party. And you know, I'm not going to say that that's a bad thing, because especially for our students, that ability to be social is actually really important. It's frankly, COVID's not their biggest risk. I think that loneliness, the academic mission. I also want us to think economically, not to say that lives don't matter. Of course, lives matter, but wearing a mask, staying home if you're sick, getting vaccinated if you haven't already done so, that is the way forward. And it's not going to disappear. As much as I wish, I actually, a month ago, if we had this conversation, I would have probably told you something completely different. I would have told you much more optimistic, like fall is going to feel just like normal, be able to get back to everything. We still can get back to everything, but we do need the masks at this moment. My hope is that may change as we move forward. So if you haven't done so, please get vaccinated. Please have a conversation with someone you trust. Don't rely on social media or friends and family who maybe don't know all the facts. If you have a doctor who you trust, talk to that individual. We have some good information on the website and on the campus website. And my final comment is just, while we're thinking about health, I want us to not forget about health more broadly. And I know Rima and I have talked about this, is, take care of yourself otherwise. I went and made sure I was vaccinated against shingles, for example, because I had just not gotten around to that the last couple of years. So make an appointment with your doctor, take care of your health and take care of each other. And I'll stop there. And if I missed anything, I'm happy to circle back.
No, thank you. And, I'm glad you shared the comment that a month ago, you maybe had a different take on things, because I think we all did. We're trying to plan and prepare communications, and it's exhausting, the changes. That was one of the questions we received. Actually, I think it was today, that people are asking why all these changes. And I think you did a great job explaining why the changes, and it doesn't make it any less exhausting and frustrating. But I think it's clear that we're dealing with something bigger that we just can't get in front of yet. So thank you.
Yeah, I just would say, that churn is frustrating. The other day I was driving into work and I'm like, I'm tired of this. I had that moment where I'm like, I'm sick and tired of this. And I know we've all felt that way. And, to be honest, to a large degree, I'm very fortunate. My life actually doesn't look quite as different because I go to work. I still see patients and I see people that I've worked with for years, but it is scary for folks who've been home for the last 18 months to think about getting back. And I think a lot of people are worried about their young kids in K through 12 who maybe are not vaccinated. Good news coming up is that the full authorization of the vaccine is expected as soon as a week or two from now. And I think that will move forward. For kids, likely the data will be available in November, and likely the authorization shortly after that. There'll be some off-label use in kids who are 11 and 10, because once it's authorized, you can sort of do that. And again, I'm very hopeful, but we got to get vaccinated if we're not, because this isn't just about your own health, it's about everyone's health. And, I also like to talk about this in economic terms. Like, it's good that we're not going to get sick, we're not going to die if we're young and healthy, but how bad is it? How disruptive is it to your academics if you're out of school for 2 weeks? How disruptive is it to your economics if you miss work? So these are the things I also think we need to come, not just public health, which of course we think about public health, but to me, this is the vibrancy of our entire community at risk.
So I'm going to throw the first question. Just a reminder, if you have a question, please use the Q&A tab. And thank you to my co-panelists. You're answering some of those, so thank you. Some of the easy ones that we can get through. But Dr. Malani, one of the questions is if we're mandating vaccinations, if we now have a mask policy again, and yet we're still coming back to campus, is this counterproductive? Should we be remote? But I mean, do you feel, medically speaking, are we safe with the policies at hand coming back face to face in just a few weeks?
I do, and I share that this is me that's back, and this is my kids that are back. People I love are back, including several of your students who I know very well. I'm not concerned about the safety is acceptable. And again, that outbreak, and I'm just going to give this example. That outbreak in Iowa, people talked so much about the COVID transmission. This was riding your bicycle across Iowa. And what I asked is, I said, but nobody got hit by a car and nobody fell off their bike. And there's this balance. And I don't know if that's a good way to a good analogy here, but campus coming back to face-to-face learning is not a zero risk proposition, but there are huge benefits to all of us, especially to students, but I think to faculty and staff too. And it can be done safely. And it can be done safely with masks and vaccination. And eventually the masks can go away once spread is down. And I don't have any concern about that, especially because people who are vulnerable, and again, we're dealing with adults here. It's a little different than the K through 12 space where you have little kids who are not eligible for vaccination. If you have a highly vaccinated, highly masked population, and you know what? This has been done pre-vaccination everywhere. And Delta changes the calculus a little bit in terms of spread, but the masks still work and the vaccination still works. So that's a very long-winded way of me saying I'm not concerned about the safety of coming back, with the caveat that campus cannot be safer than the community. So by doing our part as members of the community, we can keep community spread in check.
Thank you. Domenico, anything to add on that? I mean, you're at the executive officers table in Ann Arbor. I know that it's been exhausting for you. There's been a lot of deep conversation. Ultimately, you help guide the decisions here on our campus. So anything to add on what Dr. Malani shared?
No, I think what Dr. Malani said is spot on. I couldn't agree more with what she said. I think it's important for us to try to get back to an educational system that supports our students and our faculty scholarship and research as well, and provides the best learning opportunity for them. I also, and Dr. Malani pointed out that if you're vaccinated, you're pretty safe. And this is why we're requiring vaccination. And if you're vaccinated and you're wearing a mask, you're even safer. So this is why we're taking these precautions. So we do have systems in place to make sure that we can come back in a safe and controlled environment and offer a terrific education. And I know that there is concern about this, but I think that everything that Dr. Malani and her medical colleagues have provided, and some of my colleagues that look at air pollution and transmission of aerosols have indicated that wearing the mask certainly cuts down on transmission, and being vaccinated does not prevents the actual infection from taking hold. So I think that we've got things pretty well covered here, and I think that coming back is a good course for us in the fall.
Thank you. Okay, so the most common question we received when we put the invitation out was, will we have a fall face covering policy? That's been addressed because it came out after the invite went out. So the next two most common questions are, how are we going to enforce the policy, the vaccination policy for students as well as faculty and staff? And how are we going to enforce the face covering policy for students in the classroom and faculty and staff? So I will start with Amy to start with the student enforcement piece of this, and then Rima will address the faculty and staff portion as relates to the vaccinations. Amy.
Great, thank you. So I want to start out by saying these are really important questions. And I also want to start out by saying that we're working very hard on the student affairs team to educate students about the policies, because our first line of defense, I think, is to make sure that our students understand the policy, understand clearly what's expected of them, when it's expected of them, and why we're doing what we're doing in order to lower the risk of transmission on campus and to contribute to our community. So this is really about keeping our community safe, and we're spending a lot of time thinking through what that enforcement looks like. Reality is we're still fine tuning what that is, but as soon as we have the final policy, which we should have soon, or the enforcement policy, we will be communicating that out aggressively. I can tell you we're managing lots of calls at this time on the COVID hotline, emails coming in to help students understand what their options are around medical exemptions or religious exemptions or postponement if they're not in the country at this time. So a big portion of this is the education of our students, but more to come soon. We are fine-tuning both vaccination policy enforcement as well as mask wearing enforcement.
Rima?
Thank you very much. So I'll start first with the enforcement question. So for faculty and staff at this time, we're still, again, thinking about all of this, just like Amy talked on the student side. For faculty and staff who don't want to comply with the vaccine requirement and have not been granted either a medical or religious exemption, we are going to ask folks to talk with a designated public health advisor. This is someone who can address specific questions or concerns around the vaccine. So these advisors are available to all faculty and staff on all 3 campuses. And we're asking folks to give them a call to talk about either the vaccine, its safety, the importance of being vaccinated. And they're here to field all of our questions Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Just be aware, though, if you're calling, that they're not there to necessarily, they are not going to be offering any medical advice. They're not there to talk about any HR or university policy, but we do want folks to call this number. But ultimately, when it comes to enforcement, folks who do not comply with the requirement to either get the vaccine or have not been granted that medical or religious exemption by August 30th, they will be subject to appropriate campus disciplinary procedures. I know the big question is, what are those procedures? At this time, that's still being discussed and vetted, and it will be finalized, we hope, in the near future, and then will be communicated more broadly. So that's on the vaccine mandate front. When it comes to the face masking policy, it's similar to what Amy discussed. Obviously, if you're on campus, we want you to be wearing a mask. If you have concerns either about a coworker or a colleague and you're in an enclosed space and mask wearing is not happening, we want you to talk to your supervisor. You'll work in partnership with our office. We'll try to understand what's going on and we'll address it from there. So it's a continued work in progress.
And I do want to add, hopefully people did not throw away their face coverings, over the summer. They still have them, but there will be masks in the classroom if someone forgot one or wants a second one, those will be distributed before the start of the semester. Thank you both. Gabriella, a couple questions here for you. One is, if you can maybe talk a little bit about the rationale that fully remote students still have to be vaccinated. And particularly there could be we're looking or exploring maybe a slight change or modification to students that are international that will not be coming to campus or even this country for their classes, if you wanted to comment on that.
Yes, well, hello everybody, and thank you for this opportunity to explain a little bit more. I want to echo what Dr. Malani, Chancellor Grasso, Rima, and Amy just said, that we are still working on a lot of details, okay? So just like you're doing for your own family, there's a lot of things we need to figure out, put in place, make sure that we're doing the right thing. So please be patient with us. Trust me, we're gonna announce policies as soon as we have them. Regarding students, so I'm sorry, I said this before, a student is a student is a student. So all students, whether they're taking classes remotely, whether they're coming on campus, need to be vaccinated. Let's say that a student is taking 4 online courses. There might be that one time that they want to come on campus to take a book, to get a book at the library, to work in group with their classmates. And that is why we need to have them vaccinated as well. What is the difference between a student who's taking classes remotely here in the US and somebody who's taking classes in our grad program, let's say in India, or our COB program, let's say in Italy, is that, first of all, those students are under those countries' regulations as far as vaccine, right? For example, I'll give you the example of Italy. Italy has approved AstraZeneca as a vaccine. Our CDC is still working on the AstraZeneca vaccine. And also we know for sure they're not gonna jump on a plane to come to our campus. So that's the difference between the two populations. So in general, we want all of our students to be vaccinated. And if they do come to campus, to wear their mask, whether they're signed up for online classes, hybrid classes, or face-to-face classes. There was a second part to your question, Ken?
You addressed it.
Okay.
You addressed it there. I'm going to stay with you for a moment too. Just a few more. Hopefully we don't have to go here, but a question was raised. Do we have a plan to pivot this fall? Should we have to go remote?
Okay, so I want to thank everybody on our campus and especially my faculty colleagues who were able to do a fantastic job pivoting remotely back in March 2020, right? Which seems a long time ago. But so thank you for your work. We, as you know, painfully know, we had to prepare 3 versions of our fall campus. We had to work on a 15% scenario, which turned out to be about 12 to 14%. On a second scenario, which is 50%, which is at about 38% on campus, I mean. And then on the final schedule, which is the one we are putting in place for the fall, that is in place for the fall, for which our students have already enrolled, right? And that turns out to be about 62% of campus density. So yes, if we have to pivot from the current schedule to back to a 15%, we have it all ready to go. It will be a tremendous work for our registrar's office, for us, because now we're working on our syllabi for face-to-face courses. We need to transfer them to online. We need to put them to on-reg. It will be a lot of work, but everything is in place for us to be able to change if needs be. But I echo what Dr. Malani said. I remain optimistic. I think that if we do get vaccinated, if we do get the mask, we're going to go over this bump very easily.
Fingers are crossed for sure. I'm going to stay with you, Gabriella, because we're getting some of these questions came in late last night. Sorry.
Okay.
and I see they're coming up on the Q&A here. So faculty are wondering, are there going to be any provisions made for additional microphones in the classroom so students can hear if they're covered? Are there special masks that the school, well, the university will provide that are plastic cutout so they can see mouths and lips? And I don't know, this came up before. I know the hub was a resource. I'm taking notes here because these are really good questions that are going to help all of us on this call. Just, get answers if we don't have them today and communicate them out. But any early direction on that you can share?
Yeah, so this is an excellent question and we're working on that. So I asked a question of Carrie, meaning ITS, can we get microphone for faculty? Because we know very well, I teach French. How hard is it to teach French with a mask when your students read your lips? They really have to see your lips, how you pronounce that word and that other. So I completely understand. We're working on that. So I talked to Carla, who suggested, and please email me directly if you want that article, or Carla, who emailed me an article about this mask that have a square plastic. Those are very good. We can look into purchasing some of those masks. We're looking into microphone, but we're trying to do everything we can to put this in place. And the hub is working, and ITS are working on that this very specific issue. So thanks for bringing it up. One thing I'm going to tell you, and Dr. Malani might verify, is that the face shield is not safe. So I know it's tempting to just have that face shield so that the students can see you, but those are not as safe as wearing masks. And so we do not want those instead of masks.
Amy, I'll throw this to you. Faculty primarily are wondering if they are going to get a roster of students that are not vaccinated in their classrooms.
We have an obligation to keep students' protected health information very private. So we will not be sharing names of students who are not vaccinated or who are vaccinated. So there is a very limited set of people who have access to that information for the purpose of real protection of student private health records.
And Amy, while I have you, can you share the latest vaccination rates for students and faculty staff on campus? I realize it's not updated on the website this week. Thank you for pointing that out. We will get that updated. It's updated on Mondays usually. Go ahead, Amy.
Yes, absolutely. So as of this morning, when you look at the Qualtrics data, what you can see is the vaccines that have been verified And so for many who as faculty or staff have already submitted theirs, they got a confirmation email saying, your vaccine has been verified. But we can also see students that have submitted their information in the system to be verified. And when you include both of those numbers, we've just crossed the 40% mark for our students. We've seen pretty significant jump in the last 2 weeks. So I am very heartened by that. Again, I've been asked a couple of times in other forums, and I keep saying we told students they have to do this by the 31st, right? So I'm certainly not pushing a panic button. I know that when I'm told a deadline, I hear that and I remember that deadline. So I continue to be heartened by what's coming in. I will also add that Rima is probably who to turn it over to for the faculty staff data.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, so when we checked the numbers on Monday, and I haven't looked at them since then, we were at 67% confirmed vaccine status for our faculty and staff. And my hope is that by the time we check those numbers again this week for Monday, we'll see a bump in those numbers as well.
And again, if you go to the COVID-19 website, there we have a dashboard, COVID data. We added this dashboard a couple of weeks ago, so you can track and to see where the campus is on that. Laura Drabchuk, I'll throw this one to you. A question about, are we going to have any on-campus vaccination clinics this fall?
Great question. Thanks, Ken. Yes, we're actually looking to bring another vaccine clinic back to the campus. And once we finalize those details, we will definitely make sure that that's communicated to the campus. But just as a reminder, in the interim, vaccines are still readily available throughout the Detroit metro area. So you don't necessarily have to wait on us for your vaccine. You can readily find them throughout the community. And just as a kind of a closing note, we have had a couple of vaccine clinics on our campus in the past. And unfortunately, the participation rates in those clinics were very low, but that's not going to deter us from having another clinic here coming soon.
And there are options all throughout Southeast Michigan for people to obtain a shot. We have information on our website. It's been in our communications throughout the summer. So hopefully, there could be a more convenient option for people on this call or students to do something maybe closer to home in order to get vaccinated. Melissa, next question for you. It came in 3 questions. How are we communicating to prospective students, recently admitted students about all of these policy changes? And do we have any indication on how these policies are impacting enrollment as of August 11th?
Thank you, Ken. Yes, of course, we're monitoring very closely the enrollment question. The good news is that as of now, we're not seeing any impact to students. I mean, we've had only a couple situations of students essentially saying they were pulling their deposit. But again, this time of year, a couple is not something that we're too concerned about. You generally have a certain amount of melt. As far as communicating, there's been a robust communication plan that we've worked with both with the ER team and ourselves to continue to ensure that students know about it. Most of it to this date has been through email. Obviously, the social media that ER puts out. There are some welcome kits that Amy and her team are putting out to students that are being mailed home. And there is some continued conversation right now about some postcards that'll go out, because we do recognize that as much as we encourage students to pay attention to their email, that does not always happen. And so we are doing sort of a multi-tiered communication plan to ensure that all students understand the policies. And then as far as just overall enrollment, we'll continue to monitor, obviously, the continued conversation about enforcement. But as Amy said, we're going to be optimistic that it's just over the next 3 weeks, students take care of things and that there will be minimal numbers needing to be impacted by that side of things.
Thank you. Amy, I'm going to go back to you. This question came up. What if, sorry, a lot of student questions, and understandably so. What is the fall protocol policy should a student contract COVID? What are we going to do about quarantining the class, informing others around that student, et cetera? I know we didn't have too many cases on campus this past year, which was great, but we don't know what to expect this fall.
Right. And the good news is that last year, since we didn't have too many, we quarantined, I believe, about 10 classes. We had the opportunity to practice what this looks like. So if the numbers are greater this year, we have systems in place. So as many people know, we have the Dearborn COVID support hotline and email address, which is 313-593-5056, which is monitored by student affairs staff, and Dearborn COVID support at umich.edu. That is publicized to students in every all student email with a big button on the bottom and text throughout our emails. And what students do and have been doing is they call our hotline. We do contact tracing right away. We kind of stop the presses and say, what happened? When was this student experiencing onset of symptoms? Doing the math. Then we're reaching out to, if needed, to quarantine. We're reaching out to not only the dean, the department chair, but also the instructor to kind of go through the plan of what next steps are, right? And so there's a set of next steps around informing students in the class who will be doing that. What will happen for the class? Will they just stop moving forward? Nope, they're going to flip to online. So we're working alongside the instructor. We also talk with the student about what the expectations are. If they have COVID themselves, and maybe there isn't a need to quarantine because they haven't been on campus recently, then we're helping them figure out when they can come back to campus, how to communicate with their instructors. Can we support them in that? Does this mean they're going to miss some shifts at work, which could mean that they don't have enough money for food? And can we get food packed up and sent to them? So we're trying to be very thoughtful with a student and really think from top to bottom of how can we not only protect our campus, but then continue to protect and support our student.
Domenico, next question for you. This is a great question. Are we prepared to deal with the pandemic financially for many years to come? Dr. Malani said this could be around for a while, and it will be. So.
Well, if the pandemic is around for many years to come, everybody will be dealing with it. So we will be in good company with every institution in the United States and around the world dealing with it. But we are preparing and have been preparing to operate in a system that poses this type of threat and doing it safely. And I think that we've got a great team that's done a lot of thinking on it. We've got a lot of cooperative faculty members and staff members that are willing to do what it takes to make sure that we're safe along with our student body. And I think, yes, I think we're going to be well prepared irrespective of how long it really takes to defeat this pandemic, or if any other pandemics happen to arrive at our doorstep.
There was a question about, are we going to have a fall commencement ceremony in December? The answer to that question is it is scheduled as it normally is. For those of you that heard anything about our spring ceremonies this past May, they were totally reimagined based on the latest COVID protocol. It was a huge success. We will probably rework our fall commencement ceremonies to be aligned with some of the great learnings and thinking that went on. And it was well received, but most importantly, it was well received from students and parents because these ceremonies were about an hour long, and they got to leave after their names were called, which was, we could not have been thanked enough as they were leaving the ceremony. So it will be indoors. We can't do December outdoors like we did in May, but definitely more to come on that. Brian Dady, will funding for mentorships and student assistance be restored? Brian, I think you're on this call. Brian is not on the call. He did warn me that he may have to jump.
Oh,
off.
he had a doctor's appointment unrelated to COVID.
Okay, so he did provide an answer. The answer is yes, and there were a lot of financial lifts or restrictions that were lifted earlier this year. So really, one should check with their chair or their supervisor or dean to work through those details. Amy, I'm going to go back to you. There was a question here about our should faculty, what happens if people just refuse to wear a mask in the classroom? It seems to be up to the faculty they think could be a very hostile environment, like what we're seeing on airplanes and those types of things. And I just don't want to put you on the spot. It could be other people on the call that want to weigh in. I don't think we had too many issues with this. This is something we expected last year when we had the mask mandates, but it didn't happen. I know it's a different time right now, but any clarity you can give in that area? I know the question's coming in a few times now.
Absolutely. So as we said, we are fine tuning a little bit here on policy, but last fall, we used a face mask policy that really leaned on the disruptive student behavior policy, such that there was an already existing mechanism for faculty to use. I believe last fall we said something to the effect of first. If you feel comfortable, have a private conversation with the student. If they are unwilling, as we said earlier, there will be masks in academic buildings and possibly in classrooms that, hey, if you just happen to forget this time, or for some reason left it in your car, here's a mask. But we provided a series of instructions of what faculty can do in the classroom if they feel comfortable to do so. We often find that students just need to be reminded to be compliant. I do agree, Ken, I think this could be a more difficult year. We did not have one instance reported last fall of non-compliance, which was really terrific. And I'm really pleased that that was the case, but we can't assume that that's the case this year. So again, we will be producing something soon, but probably along the lines of the way we went last year and leaning on the disruptive student behavior policy.
Gabrielle, a couple questions for you. Are there any restrictions on faculty using other spaces outside the classroom for instruction? An example was given, sometimes groups of students are sent out in the hallway or other parts of campus for various learning experiences. And then a follow-up or another question there, what about classes that require performances or singing or more activities where you want to see the mouth or you need to hear what comes out of it in a different way? Can you talk about both those situations?
So sure, no, there are no restrictions. If in your classroom you want to take your students outside in the hall, outside in the serpentine of the Castle building or whatever, there are no restrictions. There are no restrictions on courses that have field trips, right? So go ahead as long as you wear the mask. The second part of the question, I checked with the provost in Flint yesterday regarding performing arts or video production courses, and I would say that we need to keep the mask. The students need to keep the mask. If you can have that experience outside where you can social distance the students, that's a different situation. Maybe in the fall you can take your students outside, but if you're inside in a studio, the students need to keep the mask, because if you're singing, if you're projecting your voice, it's more dangerous, right? So we definitely need to have that mask.
There were questions about the picnic. The decision was made. I had that on my list to share at the end of this, but it's going to be postponed just due to the latest surge, with the Delta variant, and there's a lot of extra work, that a lot of people are now going through just to, with the policy changes, and it's just not right the best time of the year. So we're going to push that out a little bit. So unfortunately, we'll have to pack a lunch that day. I'm just skimming through the questions here, and my panelists, please feel free to. Dr. Malani, any additional data on the effectiveness of the J&J vaccine, particularly against the Delta variant?
Yeah, I saw that question and I actually started to respond and then I didn't finish, but I would say a couple of things. One is we're not seeing huge numbers of breakthrough with J&J. In the lab, when you look at antibody production, and it's difficult because it's hard to know what happens in the lab is that what happens in people. There is some concern that J&J might not be as good for Delta. It does seem to be still protective against severe illness, hospitalization. Some of that is because younger people got J&J initially, and now it's shifted where we don't want to, particularly in younger women, we're not recommending it. I would say stay tuned. There's not a recommendation right now to get a second dose or to switch and get another set of vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, but stay tuned because I think things could change. I guess I wouldn't do anything different right now. If you had J&J, feel good about the fact that you had a good vaccine. There's some real benefits to it. A single dose, it's can be stored at room temperature. Doesn't need at regular temperatures, not cold temperatures, but some concerns. So that's pretty vague, and I apologize, but I think that's you're the second person who has asked me that question in the last week, and I just said to hold tight, stay put for now.
Do you have any insight? When's the FDA going to approve, take the emergency label off these vaccines, and will it be all three at the same time, or any insights into that?
I believe Pfizer will be first, and Pfizer, if you remember, way back in November, it was the first one that got the EUA, both here and in Europe. Pfizer is expected in the next week or two. This has been a big push. This has been something that the FDA has gotten extra resources to do. And if I may, I'm actually in the chat. I'm gonna this actually while we were speaking, this thing went live. It's about a 14-minute video. It includes me and then a friend of mine, Carlos Del Rio. Some of you may know him. It's on CNN like every day. But he's an expert in infectious disease from Emory. But we talk about sort of common questions around vaccines. And I would just encourage you to, we actually talk about J&J a little bit in that. So yeah, but I think the full approval is expected imminently.
And you may have noticed there's a lot of questions here about keeping children home, keeping children safe at home. If mom and dad come back, from the workplace, any guidance or suggestions there that you can offer?
Yeah, and
Great to have a doctor on the call.
Yeah, and again, I responded privately to someone who asked that. I didn't want to put it out there for everyone. My own kids are older. I have adult children. I mentioned I have one that's at Michigan, one who's a senior in high school. But I have a bunch of nieces and nephews who I love very much who are not vaccinated. So two things. One is that last year was awful for them. And COVID is not the only risk to their health. Not to say that COVID is good for anybody. It's not good for kids. But by and large, if they get COVID, they're going to be fine. And I just want to reassure them because they're not going to necessarily get it from you. They may just get it because rates have gone up in the community. So returning to classrooms for kids is essential in my mind. K through 12 education is not meant to be remote, not for high school, certainly not for little kids. So my nieces and nephews are all going back to school and I'm so happy for them. When vaccination becomes available, get your kid vaccinated. One suggestion, while you're out and about, mitigate your risk. Get vaccinated if you have not been. Be careful about going to big crowded indoor spaces with your family. I don't think it's campus that's a problem, and going to work, that's a problem. That's controlled. It's the uncontrolled. Frankly, it's family gatherings where people might have different views on vaccination that are a bigger risk to folks. But what I don't want people to think is that they're coming to campus and they're putting their whole family at risk. I don't feel that is the case. I go to work as a doctor, as you know, and I visit with my young family members, and I don't worry about that risk because I know I'm careful at work. So returning to classroom, huge benefits. Masks are really important in the K through 12 classroom, and that's a discussion for another day. But the science is clear on that, and I know it is awful, but the kids don't really seem to mind too much. And by having good ventilation and masks, you can actually put a lot of kids in the classroom safely. You don't have to have as much social distancing. And the teachers should be vaccinated.
There was one question specifically, we have a lot of smaller classes here in Dearborn, maybe 30 students. They're in a classroom with a professor for a couple of hours. Risk, Dr. Malani?
Again, full vaccination, then there's very little risk. If everyone's masked like they were last year, also very little risk. If you're sick, you need to stay home. I will say that our residence halls, and again, that's a little different, and I don't know I think the union's it's separate from you guys, but of course, those are your students. We actually are not going to require masking in the residence halls. We required vaccination early there. The rates are probably 95, 96%. They may even be a little bit higher than that. So virtually everyone is vaccinated. Of course, people are welcome to wear a mask. We never say you can't, but that benefit of being able to leave your room and go to the bathroom without sticking a mask on, again, you're not sitting for 2 hours in a classroom. It's a very different setting. The professors, the teachers, the instructors go home to families of unvaccinated children and maybe vulnerable older adults. But I want to get at that point is that if everyone's masked and they're wearing their mask properly and it's reasonably ventilated, if you are crowded into a tiny, tiny room, which I don't think that's the case. I'm thinking college parties where no one's masked or people got the mask, kind of half on, half off, then it's a different risk. But classrooms are controlled. They're set up properly. They're pretty well. A lot of your buildings are beautiful, brand new, very new. They're well ventilated. So I'm not worried. And especially if you've got good vaccination, good adherence to masks, because again, children are the same, probably less well ventilated. Many, certainly in Ann Arbor, the schools are very old and the kids aren't vaccinated. They're not eligible yet. So long way of saying, yes, you are safe.
I have two final questions. One is, this has come up recently. Will the university provide N95 mask for faculty? And I know there was discussion in our return to campus meeting earlier today. Laura, did you want to take that one maybe?
Sure, and then Dr. Malani can feel free to jump in as well. So at this point, you know, the N95s would not be something that we would recommend for use on the campus. Those are really more reserved for individuals in a healthcare setting. You know, there's still the surgical masks that are out there, and then the layered masks that are still strongly recommended.
I'll just add to Laura's comments. You know, I do wear an N95 when I go into a room where someone has a contagious respiratory infection, whether it's TB or COVID or influenza for that matter. Actually, with influenza, it's a little different, but it's not comfortable to wear, and they have to be fitted. You have to be trained to wear them properly. They do serve a very important purpose. They were in short supply. We were reusing them. I still can't get myself to throw them out now. I like have a pile in my office of them, but they're not comfortable. And I think having a comfortable mask is really important also. And when I'm out and about, when I'm seeing patients in clinic, some of them frankly could have asymptomatic COVID. I wear a regular mask. I only wear the N95 in like the ICU, in the rooms with confirmed COVID. So I want to again reassure you, the regular mask is pretty darn good. And there are actually high quality studies that have shown that. So people, if you want to wear an N95, certainly feel free, but it's not that comfortable to wear one, especially for a long time.
All right, it's 2:59. I really wish some of these questions came in earlier because we could have worked them into the presentation. So there's a couple, just looking at these, are some takeaways that I have written down that we're going to get back to. There's a lot of questions about guest policies. It's a lot of our IA staff are asking those. That make sense because they're hosting people on campus. We will get back to you on that. I mean, we're out of time, and I think we need to get more meat around that subject. And then there's also a lot of questions I noticed here about retrofitting offices with plexiglass and those types of things. And Carol, I'm sure you have seen those, and this is something that we will take back and address. And this was very helpful. I don't recall a town hall with this many questions either. So I know people are antsy, and I know people have a lot of concern, and there's a lot of good questions here that we will tackle over the next couple of weeks. So before we close, Domenico, I'm going to let you have final word, and then I'll just wrap up with a few housekeeping.
Okay, thanks, Ken. First, I want to thank Dr. Malani for joining us and providing a lot of great information. I want to thank you for hosting this, and you did a terrific job as always. And my colleagues that answered, the provost, Gabriella, who did a terrific job, and Amy and Melissa and Laura and everybody else who participated. But I do want to say that we hear you loud and clear. There are a lot of concerns about health and safety moving forward into the fall, and we don't want to put anybody at risk. And this is why we are taking enormous precautions, getting as much information as we can, and doing the best job we can to make sure that we can come back in a safe and effective manner. But as Dr. Malani mentioned, it's also important to come back and start teaching so that we don't lose a whole generation of students due to this pandemic. So we're trying to balance both, but I can assure you that our top priority is keeping everyone safe. And this is why we're spending so much time on this topic. This is why we're having these town halls. I encourage you to please read all the communications that come out of my office or Ken's office or the provost's office. It's rich with information that addresses many of the questions that were posed today. So I encourage you to look at the information that we're sending out, and we're always ready to answer questions. I want to thank you for everything that you've done, keeping us safe and delivering an outstanding education for our students up to this point and going forward. Stay safe, go blue, and I look forward to seeing you on campus, masked as appropriate in the hallways or outside with a big smile on everybody's face. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Domenico. Kamal, I don't know if there's a way to capture the questions, but I also just want to thank all of the people on this call, the prep. There's a lot that goes into it. Thank you all for your questions. As I mentioned, it's going to give us some more work to do and follow up, and we will communicate to you. A recording of this town hall will be in Reporter on Tuesday, and we'll share that with the campus. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the summer. 3 more weeks to go. It's sort of depressing, but the fall will be fun. So thank you all. Have a great day. Until next time.